first 3 games, the first month of the Premier League season, as we are in an international break, and look at what we've learned from this first month so far in the Premier League. Now, of course, it is very, very early days for me to really make any major assumptions about clubs, so take everything I say here with a grain of salt. But I think from 3 games you still can learn some stuff about a club in terms of maybe how a player's season's going to go, how their team season's going to go. Do they look better than maybe people thought, etc. So that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to go through each team and tell you what we've learned so far in the Premier League. Maybe if you guys like this can sort of be a, I guess, monthly thing every month where we check up on each team and look at what we've learned. But yeah, let me know if you agree or disagree with what I've said for your club. But without further ado, let's begin. So we're going to go in a random order today. I'm going to start with Newcastle. Newcastle, we've learned that Eddie Howe is more versatile than people think. With defensive absentees already approaching the height of Newcastle's injury crisis from last season, Eddie Howe has had to think outside the box so far this season. Usually, a manager who asks his team to stick to playing good football, staying on the front foot, Howe has changed things up at the start of this season. With so many defenders out through injury and suspension, Emil Groff and Dan Burn had to start at centre-back against Spurs. Howe instructed his players therefore to defend much deeper and play a little more reactively. Newcastle had just 34% possession, but ran out 2-1 winners. They only had less possession in 3 games in the whole of last season. Perhaps buoyed by his side's opening day, backs to the wall 1-0 win over Southampton, Howe was happy to let Spurs have the ball for long periods. They might have ridden their luck a little bit, and Spurs and Southampton missed some good chances versus Newcastle. But Newcastle had even better chances and were far more clinical, which is ultimately all that matters. Howe deserves credit for getting Newcastle through this mini availability crisis unbeaten, and has proved that Newcastle can win the ugly way. Next up we have Wolves. We have learned that Wolves cannot transition to a back 4 yet. Wolves have had a very, very mixed start to the Premier League. They started off with a respectable 2-0 loss at the Emirates before being battered 6-2 at home by Chelsea. However, they recovered and got a point away at Forest the following game. Now, one thing we have probably learned from Wolves so far is their defence does seem to be a bit of an issue. Last season the defence wasn't too great either, as excluding the bottom 3, only 3 other teams in the league conceded more than Wolves. They sold Max Gilman and didn't replace him, which is a big concern, and they probably needed another defender even if Gilman stayed. One of the reasons for Wolves having a poor defence so far this season is that they have started to use a back 4 system. Last season it was more of a back 3, but now it's a back 4, and with their personnel, I don't think it works. Their fullbacks are much better as wing backs, and their centre backs are probably not good enough to play in a back 2, and particularly that Chelsea game would have showed Gary O'Neill that maybe going to the back 3 again is the best option this season. Spurs. Postecoglou's high-risk tactics will cost them points again. Usually in my second season I win things, and Postecoglou recently said, that's the whole idea. First year is about establishing principles and creating a foundation. Hopefully the second is going on to win things. The data does back that up. Spurs dominated the second half at Newcastle, only to just fall short in the final third. We ought to acknowledge that Spurs could have gone into the international break confident of similar improvements this season. But it would be remiss not to talk about how Spurs threw away the contest at St James's Park, when all too familiar, risky high line was once again exposed. Newcastle's winner, scored against the run of play, was textbook Postecoglou. A very high Spurs line, a poor press which gets easily undone, and one ball in behind leaving a 2v1 for Murphy to give Isak a tap-in. Here's the issue. Perhaps unlike Postecoglou's spells in Scotland or Japan, where the standards may be slightly lower, the Premier League clubs have the coaches, analysts, to study opponents in much detail that any tactical flaw and consistent tactical idea will be revealed and exploited. That might explain why Spurs have lost 4 of their previous 6 away Premier League matches, and why they have won 44 points from their last 31 Premier League games, stretching back to November 2023. Spurs will win points through his method, but just like last season, it appears these high-risk tactics will cost Spurs a lot of points too this season. Brighton, we have learned, will fight for Europe this season. I'm not too sure when everybody did their Premier League predictions if anybody had Brighton in the European spots come the end. However, based on the evidence so far, now it is early days, it does seem that's a very possible outcome. Brighton sit third in the table, unbeaten, with a win over Man United and a draw away at the Emirates. Many doubted the young Fabian Hurstler, but he's picked up right where Roberto De Zerbi left off, and most of the new exciting signings they have made this summer haven't even played in these 3 games, which is the best thing. You would expect once these players come into the team, Brighton will kick on even more, and the early evidence suggests that Brighton will be back, fighting for those European spots once again. Whether that will be the Champions League, Europa League or Conference League, we'll have to wait and see, but so far things at Brighton are really, really positive, and it is early days. This could just be some early season form, but it does look like Brighton are kind of back. Ipswich, we have learned, Ipswich will be competitive this season. Many people had doubts about Ipswich this season, rightfully so, after a surprise back-to-back promotion to the Premier League. However, the early signs from Ipswich show they will be no Sheffield United and get battered every week. They will come into every game this season and be competitive. Even if they go down, they're going to go down swinging. Their first 3 games have been extremely tough. Liverpool, Man City and Fulham. But they've come away from each game with some positives to take. Against Liverpool, for the first half, they restricted them to barely any chances and went in at the break at 0-0. First Manchester City, they actually took the lead. Granted it didn't last too long, but still they did make Man City sweat for at least a little bit. And against Fulham, they got a solid point versus an established Premier League side. Ipswich have shown they will be competitive and will be a tough game for any team this season in the Premier League. Manchester City. Erling Haaland, we have learned, could break his own Premier League record. We are 3 games into the season and Erling Haaland already has 2 hat-tricks. Having last season become the first men's team in English football to win 4 consecutive league titles, Man City have fired off an early warning that they want to make it 5. And with City having Haaland in this form, Pep Guardiola's side are once again the team to beat. And Haaland is the man to stop. season. He is also the first player ever to score 7 goals in the first 3 games of a campaign. The current goal scoring record in a single season is 36, set by Haaland in 22-23. If his fitness holds, Haaland might obliterate that figure. He'll need 29 more goals in the remaining 35 games to break that record, which he is clearly capable of doing. Given it's hard to imagine anyone being able to stop him on this form, he could well even make it to 40 goals in the Premier League season. Brentford. We have learned that Brentford do not need Ivan Toney. Brentford have been preparing for the day Ivan Toney leaves for a while, and that day has finally come, with Toney heading to Saudi Arabia on deadline day. While many thought Brentford without their star man would struggle, it appears the opposite. The early signs this season show they can cope just fine without him. In fact, might even be better. Since the start of last season, Brentford have won just 18% of the Premier League games that Toney has started, while they have won 34% of the games he has missed. So far this season, they have 2 wins and 1 loss, scoring 5 goals and looking so fluid. Now, this isn't to say they are necessarily better off without him, but they arguably shouldn't be concerned that they are suddenly going to collapse now they don't have Toney, and maybe cashing in on him was a fantastic decision. Liverpool. We have learned that Liverpool will be just fine without Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp is a difficult act to follow, but it's so far so good for Arne Slot and Liverpool. 3 wins from 3, 7 goals scored and 0 conceded. New Liverpool manager Arne Slot really couldn't have hoped for a better start to life. The Reds have played some brilliant football at times too, putting together some intricate passing moves and carving their opponents open. With their 3-0 win at Manchester United, Slot became the first Liverpool manager to win his first league match at Old Trafford since 1936, and he did it in convincing fashion too. In the first half, his side were rampant, and United simply had no response. It was about as convincing a display as Liverpool could have asked for. In Slot's early time at the club, he is giving plenty of reason for the fans to start believing in him. Considering there would definitely have been some worrying about an immediate drop-off after Klopp's departure, which is reasonable, it's fair to say the early days of the Slot era have been rather encouraging, and even if they won't maintain this, which I'm not sure they can, either way, anyone thinking they're going to completely collapse after Jurgen Klopp is completely wrong. Everton. We've learned that Sean Dyche is in trouble. After opening the season with a 3-0 defeat to Brighton and a 4-0 loss at Spurs, Everton finally managed to score a goal when Michael Keane put them ahead against Bournemouth. They then got another soon after as Dominic Calvert-Lewin poked the ball home to make it 2-0. Sean Dyche's side appeared comfortable at that stage, and they were still in a position to be relaxed about the score for the next 30 minutes. As late as the 87th minute, they still led by 2 goals. Then, they did something no team has ever done before, conceding 3 goals from the 87th minute onwards to lose 3-2. It was the latest the team had ever led a Premier League game by 2 goals and then gone on to lose. Dyche had faced all sorts of challenges last season, including points deductions, and his side still came out well clear of relegation. On top of that, they underperformed their expected goals by 15, by far the worst record in the division, suggesting they were creating chances and with some better finishing would have finished higher up the table. Their impressive defensive record meant those problems at the sharp end of the pitch weren't felt too badly. However, so far this season, they have scored exactly in line with their XG, but capitulated at the back. it's too early to say he should be sacked, but after 3 devastating defeats and defensive calamities, Dyche quickly needs to turn things around, otherwise he could be in trouble of losing his job. Bournemouth will be perfectly fine without Dominic Solanke. Last season under Iraola, Bournemouth were very successful, who after a slow start picked up form, playing some nice football and got a very solid 12th place finish. One of the main contributors to that 12th place finish was Dominic Solanke, who had a very impressive 19 Premier League goals. No other Bournemouth player even hit double digits for goals last season, with Solanke the sole man to score the goals. So naturally, when Solanke left this summer, a lot of people maybe thought that Bournemouth would drop off. However, this season so far, they have been perfectly fine, with 5 points from 3 games, 5 goals scored, including 3 in an incredible late comeback versus Everton. And once Semenyo looks to have picked up the mantle of being the goal scorer, and Bournemouth have been pretty decent in front of goal. That's without Evan Nilsson, their big money signing, scoring too. So if he can get in on the act, then Bournemouth may be seriously cooking this season. And even if he flops, Bournemouth will be fine, as the Iraola system is more important than Solanke. Crystal Palace, we've learned that the new signings were needed. Crystal Palace have had a difficult start to this season with just 1 point from 3 games. However, I don't expect them to be like this for the rest of the season. Palace were quite underprepared for their games, as versus Brentford, Joachim Andersen and Mark Gay played together despite being under heavy transfer speculation. Mateta had just come back from the Olympics, Elise still hadn't been replaced, and only 2 new signings played that game. Versus West Ham, it was a very similar story, with Joachim Andersen sold by this point and no replacement brought in. Versus Chelsea, the team managed to get a good point, although were outplayed for large portions. However, none of their new signings featured in that game, or at least their deadline day signings. This might seem bleak, but firstly, it shows that their new signings were needed in this Palace team, and you would worry for them if they didn't sign anybody, but they have. Lacroix, Chalobah and Nketiah have joined, who will all add much needed quality to this Palace team, and once these new boys come into the side, you would expect Palace to be perfectly fine this season. Manchester United, we have learned that Erik ten Hag is far from safe. It's a new season for United, but it appears the same old doom and gloom around the club. United go into the international break with just 3 points, 2 goals scored and 5 conceded in 3 games. The worrying thing is, it was the same old story in all of the games. When it came to being both unable to properly control or kill off a match and letting a result slip at the end. Against Brighton, that was the story. That was the 6th time since Ten Hag's arrival that United have lost a Premier League game, thanks to a goal scored in the 90th minute or later. Against Liverpool, it was Casemiro's mistakes for the first 2 goals that cost the team, but a lot of that can be put down to the tactics, both in Casemiro being isolated and Ten Hag's instructions to his team to play too quickly. What stood out versus Liverpool was the contrast between the 2 managers. Arne Slot has only had 3 games in charge, but has already put a visible structure in place, making this Liverpool team slower and calmer than under Jurgen Klopp. Meanwhile, 3 games into his 3rd season, a clear identity is still not clearly visible in this United team. A lack of organisation and frequency at which United concede decisive goals late on, lack of general tactical identity notice of a 1-year contract extension given to him. Nottingham Forest, we've learnt that Nuno needs to improve Forest's home form. Nottingham Forest have made a competent start to this season, winning 5 points and going unbeaten at the beginning of Nuno's first full season in charge. But their failure to take 3 points against Wolves, despite holding more possession and producing more chances, is part of a wider pattern. Forest have won only 4 of their last 25 matches in all competitions at the City ground, and the club's home record has got worse under Nuno than it was under Cooper. They have won just once at home since mid-February, and a mere 3 times in 13 Premier League encounters since his appointment. Nottingham's success this season will depend upon turning those home draws into home wins, and while Forest look like a solid mid-table team right now, they could really push on into the top half if they can win more games at home this season. West Ham, we have learned that the new signings will improve West Ham. West Ham have made some seriously good signings this summer, and a lot of them too. However, Julian Lopetegui has been reluctant to chuck them all in the deep end and has slowly bedded them into the team. Through these little glimpses, though, we have seen some of them look really good. Aaron Wan-Bissaka looks fantastic, contributing with an assist off the bench versus Palace, and was decent versus Man City. Max Gilman has been one of the few to start all the games and has been sensational. Guido Rodriguez has played some games and been okay, while Fulklug, Somerville, Tadibo and Soler haven't really featured too much. With all of these guys to come into the team, West Ham should be much improved, and after the international break look like a completely different team. Leicester City, we've learned that they lack an identity under Steve Cooper. Leicester had a clear philosophy and identity under Enzo Maresca in the Championship, and while some fans weren't too happy he stuck with it no matter what, there was a clear plan at least in place. However, so far, it is still early days of course, but Steve Cooper hasn't really been able to get his style of play across to the team. In their 3 games this season, particularly going forward, they have looked really poor and relied upon individuals to score their goals or set-piece goals. Defensively, they've been a bit exposed too, and while they've got points on the board, which is good, it's been a tough start to the season. Cooper needs to, over this international break, try to develop a better attacking identity in this Leicester side, as they cannot keep relying on individuals to bail them out. If it cannot do this, then Leicester will be in trouble this season. Arsenal, we have learnt that they will continue to be title contenders. Manchester City may be favourites for the Premier League title, but Arsenal have picked up where they left off last season and look every inch aside that can push for champions all the way again. Their trip to Aston Villa was never going to be straightforward. It's a game that trouble Arsenal a lot. After all, 40% of their Premier League defeats last season came against Villa, losing home and away to Unai Emery's men. With that in mind, Arsenal have already collected more points from games against Villa than they did in entire of last season, and that shouldn't be overlooked. While some might not see a win at Villa Park as being a big deal, that was an early statement from the Gunners, and a hugely promising result against a team who really have troubled them in the past. Miguel Arteta's side have looked incredibly businesslike over their first 3 weeks of the season, despite dropping points versus Brighton, but before that red card, they were in control of the game. The 89 points they accumulated last term was the most they've won in a Premier League campaign since the 90 recorded by the Invincibles. Don't this term they surpass that because they are more than good enough and will stay competitive in the title race again. Aston Villa, we've learned that John Duran could push Ollie Watkins out of the first team. Ollie Watkins has now got 8 Premier League appearances without a goal for Villa. This is his longest barren run since Emery's arrival. And yet, Villa are fine. You'd think that when your main striker goes on their worst run in their career, results would drop off. Granted, Villa did lose 2 of their last 4 league games at the end of last season, but this campaign, Emery's side have won 2 of their opening 3 games. And that's thanks to the form of John Duran. The Colombian has come off the bench in all 3 games this season, each time for Watkins, and scored the winner in 2 of them. Only Erling Haaland has scored as many match-winning goals as Duran so far, whose strikes have already won Villa 4 points. He is the definition of a super sub, with only 1 player in Premier League history having a higher share of their goals come as a substitute than Duran. Villa host Everton in 2 weeks' time, and surely it's a matter of time before Duran gets his chance to replace Watkins as the starting number 9. Southampton. We have learned that Southampton will not change their style. Russell Martin is unapologetic in his commitment to playing out from the back. It's what worked for them getting promoted from the Championship last season, and we've quickly learned that is exactly how they're going to play in the top flight. But that approach caused some problems last term, and is already leading to goals being scored all too easily this term. Last season, only 4 Championship sides committed more errors leading to an opposition goal than Southampton. In the second tier, they were able to make up for those issues with a ton of goals at the other end. The Premier League is a step up though. In 3 games so far this season, Southampton have made more errors leading to a goal than anyone else, and incredibly, they've already made more errors than 3 teams in the entire of last season combined. That's Man City, Wolves and Palace, by the way. They played themselves into trouble time and time again against Brentford, with all 3 goals coming from an individual error. There are more than a few shades of Burnley about this Southampton team, and we all know how that season ended for Burnley. Whether Southampton can cut out these errors is another question, but one thing is for sure, it seems Southampton will continue to play their way this season, regardless of if it costs them points. Chelsea. We have learned that Chelsea will remain inconsistent. Chelsea continue to be a polarising team, and after 3 games, they have had 3 very different results and performances. Against Man City, it was an encouraging display with some nice moments, but a lack of quality. Versus Wolves, the defence collapsed, but the attack sparkled, with ruthless counter-attacks and goals galore. Yet versus Crystal Palace, the attack went back to being wasteful, and after a bright first half, the team collapsed in the second half. Those 3 performances suggest that just like last season, Chelsea will be a very inconsistent and unpredictable side. Some games, everything will click, as it did versus Wolves, but other days we will see the same frustration from last season, with horrible finishing and poor errors at the back costing Chelsea points. It's something we have come to expect from Chelsea in recent years, and it seems under Maresca, the unpredictable nature of Chelsea will continue. Again, the last team is Fulham. We've learned from Fulham that goals might be hard to come by for them this season. Fulham were unable to add a striker over the summer, which means a second season without replacing Mitrovic. While Rodrigo Muniz was able to fill the void last season, it might become a problem this year. Neither Muniz or Raul Jimenez have scored, with Muniz looking particularly off in front of goal, having had 11 shots in 3 games, the 6th most of any player United, who conceded the second most shots in the league last season. Marco Silva's side really should be scoring better. The added invention of Smith Rowe won't count for much if Muniz or Jimenez can't step up, and the sale of promising young striker Jay Stansfield on deadline day may be one they live to regret. So there we go. That is what we've learned from every Premier League club so far this season. Let me know if you agree or disagree with those selections. And if you have enjoyed, please leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in another video.